As mentioned before, Keller ends one of his books on Jonah by asking, who wrote the book of Jonah? And my answer is that Jesus did. One of the things that really struck me as I read through the minor prophets again and again is how they each seem to be giving commentaries on one another. The books interlock so much, especially in the case of Jonah, with its links to Hosea and Amos. But as we've seen, it goes through Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Micah, back to Deuteronomy. Everywhere else throughout the Bible, the books comment on one another and help to interpret one another. It seems to me especially that Hosea and Jonah are mutual commentaries on one another. Hosea, like Jonah, was written during the reign of Jeroboam II. At this time, Israel was expanding its borders against Syria, who had previously taken her lands. The Bible talks about Israel taking back the land of Gilead and Naphtali. Gilead being the region east of the Jordan, and Naphtali being the area of Galilee in the north. But Syria was now weakened and posed less of a threat to Israel. This is because Assyria was coming against them more and more often. This is during the era of the Assyrian Empire, which is dated back to 911 BC and runs to about 612 when Nineveh was destroyed. Jonah is written around 750 BC. Author William Cooper, in the book The Authenticity of Jonah, says that the Assyrian Empire was in its death throes at this time, though. It had suffered earthquakes and was suffering civil war. And when Jonah came and preached to them, they were open to that preaching because they could see the portents, especially in the eclipse of Amos, to their own demise. They were ready for repentance at the moment. At this point, though, Syria too is weakening, and her diminishing power is the result of battles with Assyria. Israel too had lost many battles and was oppressed by Assyria, and had been since the time of Ahab. As we saw from the Bible as history, Assyria writes of having contact with the Israelite kings from Omri through Ahab and through his sons, and through Uzziah to Hezekiah on the Judean side. We've seen their cruelty before, but author Jared Bias gives us another look at it in his book, Jonah for Ordinary People. In 1845, archaeologist Austin Henry Layard discovered the palace room of Sennacherib in Nineveh. On the wall was a 39-foot stone relief called the Lachish reliefs, and it depicted his victory over Lachish. Etched in these stones are pictures of people being flayed, their skin ripped from their legs, and being hung in public places for others to see. Other reliefs depict another favorite Assyrian technique. They impaled their victims and left them out in the open for the public to watch them slowly die. Then there was burying people alive up to their necks, while their bodies wasted away in their own excrement. The Assyrians also specialized in cutting off limbs, gouging out eyes, crucifixion, which they invented, and forcing victims to grind up the bones of their ancestors, thus erasing their legitimacy and claim to rule. The Assyrian army was a brutal force in the ancient world. In 612 BCE, Nineveh fell, and by 605 BCE, Babylon had usurped Assyria as the region's superpower. Within 20 years, Babylon would be besieging Jerusalem, taking over the southern kingdom. In the book of the prophet Hosea, we see that Israel was paying Assyria tribute, and they had entered a covenant with them, enticing their attacks on Syria, which gave them the advantage to expand at that time. This then was the secret to her success over Syria. In similar cases, such as when Ahaz of Jerusalem paid Assyria to attack Samaria and Damascus, or when King Asa of Judah hired Ben-Hadad of Syria to attack Baasha of Israel, we see that the practice was to enter into a covenant or a treaty with a foreign power and pay for aid against the enemy. In this case, Assyria was attacking Syria on one flank, while Israel was gaining territory on the other. But the book of Hosea shows that Israel was just as evil as her opponents, if not worse. This act of paying Assyria was idolatry, and it was harlotry. God is the providing husband, not Assyria. This is the same idolatry of David counting his men, or Solomon multiplying horses and chariots to rely upon, or Israel going down to Egypt for help, that splintered reed who can help nobody. On top of this adulterous behavior, Israel also engaged in prostitution, idolatry, and even child sacrifice. Hosea's prophecy was that Israel was to be punished, forgiven, and returned to the promised land. We see the same sins of Israel and of Judah repeated in Ezekiel 16 and Ezekiel 23, in the passages of Aholah and Aholibah. Israel's downfall, prophesied in Hosea, was put into the same terms, going down to Sheol and then being brought back up, that Jonah used to describe his own ordeal in his memoirs. As with Jonah's vine at the close of his prophecy, Hosea presented Israel as God's vine who was to be destroyed by the east wind. Ezekiel applies the same prophecy to Judah 150 years later. When Jonah received God's oracle about Assyria's destruction, he could hope that God was relenting from these prophecies against Israel. But then, much to his anger, he was sent to preach to Assyria and to save her. This meant Assyria, the most cruel, oppressive, and violent nation on earth, would remain to ravage Israel and destroy the vine. Like Ezekiel, Joel also used much of the same language as Jonah had when he saw the coming destruction of Jerusalem. Just as the king of Nineveh fasted and repented, Joel said Judah should do this for the same reason, because who knows? Perhaps God will relent. We saw another who knows passage in the case of David. When he had sinned with Bathsheba and Nathan told him that God would punish him by taking the child, David fasted and wept and mourned until the child died. He said, who knows, maybe God will relent and let him live. Once the child died, though, David got up, cleaned his face, and went into the temple to worship God. He knew then that the child would not come back to him, but that one day he would go back to the child. This is interesting to me that David's sin of idolatry, the same sin that Israel commits over and over again, resulted in the death of the child, the death of the kingdom. We saw in Solomon's wisdom that he had adjudicated between two prostitutes, who I equated to Aholah and Aholibah, Israel and Judah, when they argued over the single infant. This could then again be the kingdom. One of the prostitutes, northern Israel, was just fine seeing the child, the kingdom, hacked in two, and dying and left for nobody, while the true mother, Judah, said, no, please spare the child, even let her have it. That mother was granted her rightful child, just as Judah was granted the rightful kingdom. These two infants then, in the lives of David and Solomon, look to me like representations of the kingdom that they were to lose in one sense or another. When Joel asked, who knows, maybe God will relent, he knew that this was a possibility, because God is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. This is exactly what Jonah knows too, and this is why he doesn't want to preach to Nineveh, because he doesn't want God to relent in their case. The teaching of Jonah has become an exact word-for-word example for Jerusalem later on. Here are some of the correspondences of Hosea's prophecy with the book of Jonah. Hosea 1:1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. We see here that he's a contemporary of Isaiah and of Jonah. In Hosea 4:1 we see, there is no faithfulness or steadfast love, and no knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing, lying, murder, stealing, and committing adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Verse 12, my people inquire of a piece of wood, and their walking staff gives them oracles. For a spirit of whoredom has led them astray, and they have left their God to play the whore. They sacrifice on the tops of mountains, and burn offerings on the hills, under oak, poplar, and terebinth, because their shade is good. Therefore your daughters play the whore, and your brides commit adultery. Verse 17, Ephraim is joined to idols, leave him alone. When their drink is gone, they give themselves to whoring. Their rulers dearly love shame. Verse 19, a wind has wrapped them in its wings, and they shall be ashamed because of their sacrifices. Throughout this chapter of Hosea, we see that Israel is playing the whore with its idolatry. It's going to shade under the trees and will be brought down by the coming east wind. Hosea 5 verse 11, Ephraim is oppressed, crushed in judgment, because he was determined to go after filth. Verse 13, when Ephraim saw his sickness, and Judah his wound, then Ephraim went to Assyria and sent to the great king. Notice the word great here. Jonah writes of the great storm, the great fish, the great city Nineveh. And here we see that Nineveh's king is the great king. But this great king is not able to cure you or heal your wound. Hosea 6:10, in the house of Israel I have seen a horrible thing. Ephraim's whoredom is there. Israel is defiled. Hosea 7:11, Ephraim is like a dove, silly and without sense, calling to Egypt, going to Assyria. Ephraim is silly as a dove. This is silly as a Jonah. And they go down to Egypt as he did. And of course their whoredom extends to their covenant with Assyria. Ezekiel 7:16 says, if any survivors escape, they will be on the mountains like doves, or like Jonahs, of the valleys, all of them moaning, each one over his iniquity. Hosea 8:8, Israel is swallowed up. Already they are among the nations as a useless vessel. For they have gone up to Assyria, a wild donkey wandering alone. Ephraim has hired lovers. This adultery has caused Ephraim to be swallowed up. This reminds us of Jonah being swallowed up by the great fish. Hosea 9:3, they shall not remain in the land of the Lord, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean food in Assyria. Always we see Egypt and Assyria linked, as we saw in Jonah. We also see this in the prodigal son, with him desiring to eat the food of pigs. Israel as a vine in verse 10. Like grapes in the wilderness I found Israel, like the first fruit on the fig tree in its first season. I saw your fathers. Verse 13. Ephraim, as I have seen, was like a young palm planted in a meadow, but Ephraim must lead his children out to slaughter. Verse 16. Ephraim is stricken, their root is dried up, they shall bear no fruit. My God will reject them because they have not listened to him. Hosea 10. Israel is a luxuriant vine that yields its fruit. The more his fruit increased, the more altars he built. Hosea 10:5. They take tribute to Assyria. The inhabitants of Samaria tremble for the calf of Beth-aven. Its people mourn for it, and so do its idolatrous priests, those who rejoiced over it and over its glory, for it has departed from them. The thing, Jeroboam's calf, itself shall be carried to Assyria as tribute to the great king. Ephraim shall be put to shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of its idols. Because you have trusted in your own way and in the multitude of your warriors. Verse 14. Therefore the tumult of war shall arise among your people, and all your fortresses shall be destroyed, as Shalman destroyed Beth Arbel on the day of battle. Mothers were dashed to pieces with their children. Thus it shall be done to you, O Bethel, because of your great evil. At dawn the king of Israel shall be utterly cut off. This is why Jonah rightly fears Assyria. Notice his vine was utterly cut off overnight. Hosea 11:5. They shall not return to the land of Egypt, but Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to turn to me. Verse 9. I will not execute my burning anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. Hosea 12. Ephraim feeds on the wind and pursues the east wind all day long. They multiply falsehood and violence. They make a covenant with Assyria. Verse 13. By a prophet the Lord brought Israel up from Egypt, and by a prophet he was guarded. Ephraim has given bitter provocation, so his Lord will leave his blood guilt on him, and will repay him for his disgraceful deeds. We see that Israel has been brought up from Egypt to the Leviathan, the depths of the sea, by that great fish. Hosea 13:1. When Ephraim spoke, there was trembling. He was exalted in Israel, but he incurred guilt through Baal, and died. And now they sin more and more, and make themselves metal images, idols skillfully made of their silver, all of them the work of craftsmen. It is said of them, those who offer human sacrifice kiss calves. Hosea 14. I shall ransom them from the power of Sheol. I shall redeem them from death. O death, where are your plagues? O Sheol, where is your sting? This, of course, is Jesus defeating death in the sign of Jonah. We see his east wind again in verse 15. Though he may flourish among his brothers, the east wind, the wind of the Lord, shall come, rising from the wilderness, and his fountain shall dry up, his spring shall be parched, it shall strip his treasury of every precious thing. But the punishment is coming in Hosea 13:16. There is hope in Hosea 14, verse 7. They shall return and dwell beneath my shadow. They shall flourish like the grain. They shall blossom like the vine. Their fame shall be like the wine of Lebanon. Whoever is wise, let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let them know. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the upright walk in them, but the transgressors stumble in them. Jonah comes to warn Nineveh. He may fear being seen as a false prophet, one worthy of death, when his prophecy doesn't come true. So he doesn't want to give it because he knows that God may relent. God didn't relent in the case of David's son with Bathsheba, but Joel says he may relent if Israel repents. In the long run, Israel will be made a luxurious vine after Jesus defeats sin and death and returns from the grave, as Jonah does from the bottom of the sea. Whatever the prophetic cycle has in store, in the end, Jesus wins the battle over death and brings his people out of sinful Babylon and into the promised land of God's holy rest.